What happens when a beloved Hollywood legend sits down for what should be a simple interview and instead faces disrespect so shocking that it ends with him walking off set? In just 34 seconds, one comment from the host would unravel years of professional courtesy and expose the ugliest side of late-night television. This is the story of how Seth Meyers destroyed his own show. Before we dive into this absolutely wild moment, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts on what went down. Now, let's get into it. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the set that night like he had done hundreds of times before on countless talk shows. The audience erupted in applause. This was a man who had given us some of the most iconic performances in cinema history. He waved to the crowd that signature smile on his face and took his seat across from Seth Meyers. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. But within minutes, the entire atmosphere would shift into something nobody in that studio could have predicted. Seth started off the interview the way he always did, with that rehearsed enthusiasm that talk show hosts perfect over years of doing the same thing night after night. He leaned forward in his chair, hands clasped together, and said, "Samuel L. Jackson, welcome back to the show. It is always such a pleasure to have you here." Samuel nodded, still smiling, still gracious. "Thanks for having me, man. Always good to be here." The audience clapped again. Seth let the applause die down before continuing. "So, you have a new project coming out, and I have to say I watched it and it is fantastic. But before we get into that, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about your career because you have been in so many movies." "Like so many movies?" Samuel chuckled. "Yeah, I have been fortunate enough to work consistently." Seth's expression changed slightly. There was something in his tone that shifted. "Fortunate is one word for it. I mean, you were in everything, like everything. Do you ever say no to a project?" The audience laughed, but it was an uncomfortable laugh. Samuel's smile stayed on his face, but his eyes narrowed just a bit. "I choose projects that interest me. I have been lucky to have options." Seth leaned back in his chair, that smirk growing wider. "Options, right? Because when I look at your filmography, and I mean this respectfully, it seems like you say yes to literally anything. You have been in some really great films. Do not get me wrong, but you have also been in some absolute garbage." The audience went silent. You could hear someone cough in the back row. Samuel's smile faded completely. He sat up straighter in his chair. "Excuse me." Seth seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but instead of backing off, he doubled down. "I'm just saying, for every great movie you are in, there are like 5 bad ones. It is like you do not have standards or something." Samuel stared at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I have standards. I have very high standards. Just because you do not understand the choices I make does not mean they are not calculated." Seth waved his hand dismissively. "Come on, Samuel. You cannot tell me you thought some of those movies were going to be good. You are a smart guy. You had to know." "What are you trying to say?" Samuel asked. His jaw was tight now. The whole audience could feel the tension building. Seth shrugged. "I'm just saying that maybe you care more about the paycheck than the art. And hey, no judgment. We all have bills to pay. But let us be honest about it." Samuel L. Jackson, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, sat there being told by a late-night talk show host that he was essentially a sellout. The disrespect was staggering. This was not playful banter. This was not a joke that went too far. This was a host using his platform to belittle a guest who had graciously agreed to come on his show. "You know what?" Samuel said slowly. "I have done over 150 films in my career. I have worked with some of the greatest directors in the world. I have built a body of work that I am proud of, and I come on your show to promote my new project, and you want to sit here and insult me?" Seth held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. I am not insulting you. I'm just asking questions. Is not that what interviews are for? Asking questions is different from being disrespectful." Samuel shot back. "You were sitting there telling me I have no standards, telling me I'm in garbage movies, telling me I only care about money. How was that asking questions?" The audience was completely silent now. People were looking at each other, unsure of what to do. This was not part of the show. This was real conflict happening in real time. Seth's face flushed red. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was angry that his guest was not just taking the insults and laughing them off. "I think you are being a little sensitive here." Those words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Telling someone they are being too sensitive when you have just insulted them is gaslighting at its finest. It is a way to make the other person feel like they are the problem, like their valid reaction to disrespect is an overreaction. Samuel L. Jackson was not having it. "Sensitive? You invite me on your show, you sit there and trash my career, and when I call you out on it, I am being sensitive." Seth tried to laugh it off. "Come on, man. This is all just conversation. You are taking this way too seriously." "No," Samuel said firmly. "You are not going to do that. You are not going to insult me and then tell me I'm taking it too seriously. That is not how this works." Seth looked at the audience as if seeking backup, as if hoping they would laugh and defuse the situation, but nobody was laughing. The camera crew stood frozen. The producers offstage were probably panicking. This was a disaster. "Listen," Seth said, trying a different approach. "I have been doing this show for years. I have interviewed thousands of people. I know how to have a conversation. Maybe you are just not used to someone being real with you. Maybe you are used to people kissing your butt all the time. The audacity of that statement was breathtaking. Here was Seth Meyers, a man whose entire career was built on being likable and safe, telling Samuel L. Jackson, a man who had earned his place in Hollywood through decades of incredible work, that he could not handle honesty. Samuel L. Jackson stood up, not quickly, not dramatically. He stood up slowly, deliberately, like a man who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. "I am done here?" Seth's eyes went wide. "What? Come on, sit down. We in the middle of the interview." "No," Samuel said simply. "I am not going to sit here and let you disrespect me on national television. I do not care if this is your show. I do not care if this makes you look bad. I have too much respect for myself to stay in this chair." Seth stood up too, panic evident in his voice now. "You are really gonna walk out over this? You are being ridiculous." And there it was again, dismissing someone's feelings, making them feel like their boundaries are unreasonable. Samuel turned to face Seth directly, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but everyone in that studio heard every single word. "I have spent my entire life earning respect in this industry. I've worked hard. I have been professional. I have treated people with dignity, and I expect the same in return. You do not get to invite me here and then treat me like I am some kind of joke. You do not get to mock my career and then act surprised when I do not laugh along with you." Seth's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. What could he say? How do you respond when someone calls you out so completely, so thoroughly that there is no defense? Samuel looked at the audience. "I apologize to all of you for this. You came here for entertainment and instead you got this mess. But I want you to understand something. You should never let anyone treat you with disrespect. It does not matter who they are or where you are. Your dignity is worth more than any appearance, any paycheck, any opportunity." Remember that the audience erupted in applause, not the polite applause of a talk show audience. Real applause. Standing ovation applause. They were applauding a man who stood up for himself, who refused to be diminished, who showed them what self-respect looks like in action. Seth just stood there, his face red, his hands at his sides, watching his show fall apart. "Samuel, please, can we just talk about this?" But Samuel was already walking toward the edge of the stage. He did not storm off. He did not make a scene. He simply left with his head held high, leaving Seth Meyers standing alone at his desk, the weight of his own words crushing down on him. The cameras were still rolling. Nobody had yelled, "Cut." The producers backstage were frozen in shock, unsure of what to do. Do you cut to commercial? Do you keep filming? This was unprecedented. Guests do not just walk off talk shows, especially not guests like Samuel L. Jackson, especially not for reasons like this. Seth turned to the audience, his face pale now, the redness draining away into something worse. He looked lost. He looked like a man who had just realized he made a terrible mistake, but had no idea how to fix it. Well, that just happened," he said, trying to force a laugh. Nobody laughed with him. One person in the audience, somewhere in the middle rows, shouted out, "You were way out of line, man." Other voices joined in. "Yeah, that was disrespectful. You should apologize." The audience was turning on him. These were people who had waited in line, maybe for hours, to get tickets to see this show. They came expecting comedy and celebrity interviews and light entertainment. Instead, they watched a host destroy his own credibility in real time, and they were not okay with it. Seth held up his hands, trying to calm everyone down. Okay, I hear you. Look, maybe I came on a little strong. Maybe I should have phrased things differently, but come on, we are all adults here. We can have honest conversations about people's careers without everyone getting upset." That was his response. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just more deflection, more attempts to make it seem like everyone else was overreacting instead of him being completely out of line. A woman in the front row stood up. She was middle-aged, wearing a sweater, looked like someone's mom. "You insulted that man to his face," she said loudly. "You told him his work was garbage. You told him he had no standards. How is that an honest conversation? That is just being mean." Seth pointed at her. "See, that is the thing. I never said his work was garbage. I said some of the movies he was in were not good. There is a difference." "No, there is not," someone else yelled. "You literally said he was in garbage movies." The audience was getting rowdier. This was turning into something beyond a talk show disaster. This was becoming a referendum on Seth Meyers himself, on his attitude, on the way he treated people. Seth's producer finally ran out onto the stage. He was a shorter guy, balding, wearing a headset that looked too big for his head. He whispered something urgently into Seth's ear. Seth nodded, looking relieved to have someone else there to share the burden of this catastrophe. Seth turned back to the audience. "All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will have our musical guest. Just give us a moment here." The producer waved frantically at the cameras, and finally someone had the sense to cut to commercial. But in the studio there was no break. The audience was still there. Seth was still there, and everyone was still processing what had just happened. Seth walked to the side of the stage where several producers and staff members had gathered. The audience could not hear what was being said, but they could see the body language. Seth was gesturing wildly with his hands. One of the producers, a woman with glasses and a clipboard, was shaking her head. Another guy was on his phone, probably calling someone important, maybe a publicist, maybe a lawyer, maybe both. In the audience, people were taking out their phones. They were texting friends. They were posting on social media. Within minutes, the internet would explode with reactions. But right now in this studio, there was just confusion and tension and the shared experience of having witnessed something truly uncomfortable. A man sitting in the third row turned to the people around him and said, "I have been coming to tapings of this show for years. I have never seen anything like that." "Never." The woman next to him nodded. "He deserved to walk out. I would have done the same thing." Back at the side stage, Seth broke away from the producers and walked back to his desk. He sat down heavily in his chair and ran his hands through his hair. He looked exhausted. He looked defeated. The commercial break would end soon and he would have to go back on camera and pretend everything was fine. He would have to introduce the musical guest and smile and act like his show had not just imploded. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you recover when you have shown your entire audience and soon the entire world that you are willing to disrespect a guest for no reason? That you think you are entitled to say whatever you want because it is your show, your stage, your platform. The musical guest, a young pop singer who was probably backstage warming up, had no idea what she was about to walk into. She would perform her song to an audience that was distracted and upset. She would smile and wave and thank Seth for having her, and the whole thing would feel hollow because everyone would still be thinking about Samuel L. Jackson walking off. Seth's producer came back over to him. She leaned down and spoke quietly but urgently. "We need to address this. You need to say something when we come back. You cannot just ignore it." Seth looked up at her. "What do you want me to say?" "That I am sorry. He's not even here anymore." "Yes," she said firmly. "Say you are sorry. Say you crossed a line. Say anything that makes you look less like a jerk right now." Seth shook his head. "If I apologize, it makes it seem like I did something wrong." The producer stared at him in disbelief. "You did do something wrong. You insulted a guest on live television. You told Samuel L. Jackson that he makes garbage movies and only cares about money. How is that not wrong?" "I was trying to have an interesting conversation," Seth said defensively. "I was trying to do something different than the usual softball questions. Everyone always complains that talk show interviews are boring and fake. I was being real. There is a difference between being real and being rude." The producer shot back, "And you were rude. Everyone saw it. The audience saw it. The cameras caught it. This is going to be everywhere by tomorrow morning." Seth knew she was right. He had to know. But his pride would not let him admit it. That is the thing about people like Seth in that moment. They get so caught up in being right, in defending their actions, that they cannot see how badly they have messed up. They double down instead of backing down. They make it worse instead of better. The floor manager started counting down. Back in 30 seconds, Seth straightened his tie. He took a sip of water from the mug on his desk. He put on his television smile, that practice expression that was supposed to make him look friendly and approachable. But his eyes gave him away. His eyes looked worried. Back in 10, 9, 8, the floor manager counted down with his fingers for the last few numbers, then pointed at Seth. The cameras were live again. Seth looked directly into the main camera and said, "Welcome back, everyone. So, that was intense, right?" He tried to laugh. A few people in the audience gave him a courtesy chuckle, but most stayed silent. "Look, I think we all need to take a breath here. What you just saw was two people having a disagreement. It happens. Adults disagree sometimes. It does not mean anyone is a bad person. It just means we see things differently." He was still doing it, still trying to frame this as a simple disagreement instead of what it actually was, a complete failure of basic respect and decency. "Samuel L. Jackson is a talented actor," Seth continued. "I have always admired his work. And I think if you go back and listen to what I actually said, you will see that I never meant any disrespect. I was simply trying to have a real conversation about the reality of working in Hollywood. Sometimes that means asking tough questions." The woman in the front row, the one who had stood up earlier, shook her head visibly. Seth saw it and his smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "Anyway," he said, moving on quickly, "we have an incredible musical performance coming up next. Please welcome to the stage." He introduced the singer and the show continued, but it did not really continue. Not in any meaningful way. The performance happened, the credits rolled, the audience filed out of the studio, but everyone knew that this episode would be remembered for one thing and one thing only: the night Samuel L. Jackson walked off. The night Seth Meyers revealed who he really was when someone pushed back against him. As the musical guest finished her final note and the applause began, Seth stood up from his desk with that same forced smile plastered across his face. "Thank you so much. Give it up one more time," he shouted over the music, clapping his hands together. But his eyes kept darting to the side of the stage to the exit where Samuel had walked off minutes earlier. You could see it in his face. Part of him was still hoping Samuel would come back, that maybe this was all some misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. But that exit remained empty. The moment the cameras cut, Seth's smile disappeared completely. He dropped his hands to his sides and just stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. The musical guest walked over to thank him, still riding the high of her performance, completely unaware of the tension. Seth shook her hand, said something polite that nobody else could hear, and then immediately turned away. The audience was filing out now, moving through the exits in clusters, and you could hear them talking, their voices carried across the studio in fragments. Cannot believe he said that. So disrespectful. Samuel was right to leave. Not a single voice was defending Seth. Not one person was saying he had a point, or that Samuel overreacted. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict and Seth had lost unanimously. One of the production assistants, a young guy who could not have been older than 25, approached Seth cautiously. Seth, there are some people who want to talk to you. Network people. Seth closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, then nodded. Yeah, okay, tell them. I will be right there. The production assistant scurried off and Seth walked slowly toward the back of the studio. His steps were heavy. This was the walk of a man who knew he was about to get chewed out. A man who knew he had created a problem that could not be easily fixed. Backstage in one of the production offices, 3 executives were waiting. 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing expensive suits, all looking extremely unhappy. Seth walked in and closed the door behind him. Sit down, one of the men said. He was older, gray hair, the kind of guy who had probably been in television for 30 years. Seth Saturday. What were you thinking? The woman asked. She did not waste time with pleasantries. What possibly made you think it was okay to speak to Samuel L. Jackson like that? Seth opened his mouth to respond, but she held up her hand. Actually, do not answer that because there is no answer that makes this okay. You insulted one of the most respected actors in the industry on live television. You called his work garbage. You accused him of only caring about money, and when he rightfully called you out, you told him he was being too sensitive. I was trying to ask real questions, Seth said, but his voice was weak. Even he did not believe his own excuse anymore. The older man leaned forward. Real questions. Seth, you have been doing this show for how many years? You know how interviews work. You build rapport. You make your guest feel comfortable. You promote their project. You do not attack them. I was not attacking him, Seth protested. I was just being honest about his filmography. His filmography, the second man said. Speaking for the first time, he was younger than the other executive, maybe in his 40s, and he looked furious. Samuel L. Jackson has been in some of the highest-grossing films of all time. He is beloved by millions of people. He has more talent in his little finger than most actors have in their entire body. And you thought it was your place to critique his choices. The woman pulled out her phone and held it up so Seth could see the screen. Do you know what is happening right now? Twitter is exploding. Instagram is blowing up. Every entertainment news site is already writing articles about this. And do you know what they are all saying? They are all saying, you are a disrespectful, entitled jerk who does not know how to treat guests. Seth felt his stomach drop. He had known this would be bad, but hearing it laid out like this made it real in a way it had not been before. We have already gotten calls from 3 other celebrities who were scheduled to appear on the show. The older man said, they are reconsidering. They do not want to come on if they think you are going to ambush them with insults disguised as questions. It was not an ambush, Seth said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded. The woman demanded, explain it to us. Make us understand why you thought any of that was appropriate. Seth sat there in silence. What could he say? The truth was he had gotten cocky. He had been doing the show for so long, interviewing celebrities night after night, and somewhere along the way, he had started to believe his own hype. He had started to think he was more important than he actually was, that his platform gave him the right to say whatever he wanted, that guests should feel grateful to be on his show regardless of how he treated them. But he could not say any of that out loud. So instead, he said, I made a mistake, a mistake. The younger male executive repeated, a mistake is forgetting someone's name or mispronouncing a word. This was not a mistake, this was a choice. You chose to disrespect a guest. You chose to double down when he pushed back. You chose to gaslight him by telling him he was too sensitive. Those were all choices, Seth. The woman put her phone away and crossed her arms. Here is what is going to happen. You're going to issue a public apology, a real one, not some vague statement about how you regret any misunderstanding. You're going to specifically apologize to Samuel L. Jackson for your comments. You're going to acknowledge that you were wrong. Seth felt his jaw tighten. His pride was still fighting against this. Part of him still wanted to justify his actions to explain that he had not meant it the way it came across, but he was smart enough to know he had no leverage here, no room to negotiate. Fine, he said quietly. And the older man continued, you're going to take a few days off. We are going to run repeat episodes. You are going to use that time to really think about what happened here and why it cannot happen again. You are suspending me. Seth asked, his voice rising slightly. We are giving you time to get your head straight, the woman said firmly. Because right now you are a liability. Right now you are hurting the show, hurting the network, and hurting your own career. So yes, take it as a suspension if you want or take it as us doing you a favor. Either way, you are not hosting for the next week. Seth stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is unbelievable. One interview goes sideways and you are acting like I committed some crime. The 3 executives just looked at him. The older man spoke slowly, carefully, like he was explaining something to a child. You disrespected Samuel L. Jackson. Not some unknown actor, not some reality TV personality. Samuel L. Jackson. Do you understand the gravity of that? Do you understand that people look up to him? that he has earned his place in this industry through decades of hard work and incredible performances. And you sitting in your comfortable late-night talk show host chair thought you had the right to tear him down. Each word landed like a punch. Seth felt his face getting hot again, but this time it was not anger. It was shame. Real deep shame that he had been trying to push down since the moment Samuel walked off. "Get out of here," the woman said, not unkindly. "Go home, write your apology. Think about whether this is really the kind of host you want to be." Seth left the office without another word. He walked through the backstage area, past crew members who avoided making eye contact with him, past production assistants who suddenly found their phones very interesting. Everyone knew, everyone had an opinion, and none of those opinions were in his favor. He made it to his dressing room and closed the door behind him. The room was small but comfortable, decorated with photos from various episodes, posters from comedy shows, little mementos from his years in television. He had always loved this room. It was his space, his sanctuary. But right now it felt suffocating. Seth sat down on the couch and pulled out his phone. Against his better judgment, he opened social media. The first thing he saw was a trending topic with his name and Samuel's. He clicked on it. Mistake. Huge mistake. The tweets were brutal. "Seth Meyers showed his true colors tonight. Imagine being so insecure that you have to tear down Samuel L. Jackson to feel important. Seth Meyers needs to apologize immediately. I will never watch his show again." Samuel L. Jackson handled that with so much class while Seth looked like a fool. He kept scrolling, each tweet worse than the last. Some people were even pulling up old clips from previous episodes, analyzing them with fresh eyes, claiming they could see a pattern of disrespectful behavior towards certain guests. Whether that was true or not, it did not matter. The narrative was forming. Seth Meyers was not the good guy. He was not the funny, harmless, late-night host everyone thought he was. He was something else, something uglier. There were even video clips already circulating. Someone had recorded the interview on their phone from the audience. The quality was not great, but you could hear everything. You could hear Seth calling Samuel's movies garbage. You could hear Samuel's measured, dignified response. You could hear the audience gasping and then eventually cheering when Samuel stood up for himself. Within hours, millions of people would see this clip. By tomorrow morning, it would be on every news show, every entertainment program, every podcast. Seth put his phone face down on the couch. He could not look at it anymore. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. How had this happened? How had a simple interview turned into a career-defining disaster? But he knew how. It happened because he let his ego take control. It happened because somewhere along the way, he forgot that talk shows are not about the host. They are about the guests. The host is just the facilitator, the person who asks questions and creates space for interesting conversations. But Seth had made it about himself. He had tried to create a moment, tried to be provocative, tried to be memorable. And he had succeeded, just not in the way he wanted. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Seth called out, expecting another producer or maybe his publicist. But it was Fred Armisen, one of Seth's longtime friends and occasional guest on the show. Fred had been in the building working on something else and had clearly heard what happened. He walked in and closed the door behind him. "Hey man," Fred said softly. "Hey," Seth replied. Fred sat down in the chair across from the couch. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, Fred spoke. "That was bad, Seth. I know, like really bad. I do not think you understand how bad." Seth looked at him. "Everyone keeps telling me that. Trust me, I get it." Fred shook his head. "I do not think you do. Samuel Jackson is not just some actor. He is an icon. He is someone who broke barriers, who opened doors for other people, who earned every ounce of respect he gets. And you treated him like he was some hack who got lucky." "I did not mean it like that," Seth said. But the words felt automatic now. He had said them so many times in the past hour that they had lost all meaning. "It does not matter what you meant," Fred said bluntly. "It matters what you said, and what you said was disrespectful and condescending and just plain wrong." Samuel has been in over 150 films. Some of them are masterpieces. Some of them are fun popcorn movies. Some of them are smaller projects that meant something to him personally. But every single one of them was his choice, his decision, and he does not owe you or anyone else an explanation for those choices. Seth felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back. "I messed up." "Yeah," Fred agreed. "You really did. And now you have to figure out how to make it right, if you even can." That last part hung in the air between them, if you even can. Because maybe some things could not be fixed with an apology. Maybe some bridges once burned stayed burned. Fred stood up. "I have to go." "But Seth, seriously, think about what kind of person you want to be. Not what kind of host, what kind of person. Because right now, based on what I saw tonight, I am not sure I like the answer." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. And Seth was alone again, sitting in his dressing room, surrounded by reminders of his success, feeling more like a failure than he ever had in his entire career. The worst part was knowing that he had done this to himself. Nobody had forced him to insult Samuel L. Jackson. Nobody had made him double down when he should have backed off. This was all him, his choices, his words, his mess to clean up. And as he sat there in the silence, he finally understood something that Samuel had tried to tell him. Dignity matters. Respect matters.